Hello and welcome to this tutorial where I'm going to take a look at grips and actions in Crayta. So if you're not sure, a grip is basically a way of changing the stance of your character so that it looks like they're aware that they're holding something in their hand. That could be a grip that makes them look like they know they're holding a knife or a sword, a gun, RPG, any kind of weapon really. And it also changes some of the animations that go with the player movement, such as the rolling and the running and that sort of thing. We're going to take a look at how we can make it so that our character looks like they are holding a sword. But to start with, this is kind of building on top of something that I did in a previous tutorial where I looked at player sockets. So if you haven't watched that one, it might be a good idea to start there. And that's all about how to take something from the environment, take an entity from the environment, and basically attach it to different parts of your player's body. So for example, if I pick up this sword, it's now been attached to my hand. So I'm attaching this using the weapon_R socket. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, it might be worth going and investigating that socket tutorial. If it does mean something to you and you know what I'm talking about, then this is a useful tutorial to figure out why it looks a bit weird and how to make sure that it looks like the player is holding the sword. So it's actually pretty straightforward to do that. All we need to do is go back into our game, and it's this sword here. So if I click on this sword, you can see how I've got it set up at the moment. I've got a script attached to the sword called pickup script, and that has one function in it called onPickup, which is fired when you interact with the sword. So when I interact with the sword as a player, it essentially will run this function here. And what this does is it does all of the stuff we talked about in the sockets tutorial, turning off collisions and setting the relative rotation and position to 0, and then attaching this weapon to the socket weapon_R. This is important that we attach it to the weapon_R socket because that means it will work with the grip that's coming up. If you attach it to the hand or something like that, it may not be quite right and may look a bit funny even with the grip attributed. So it might be worth just making sure that you're using the weapon_R socket. To make our character in a certain grip stance, we firstly need a reference to that person that's holding the thing. So fortunately, because this is called, this function is called when a player interacts with the sword, the player who has interacted with the sword is then stored in this variable that's passed in between these brackets here. So the player is actually other, or the player's character is actually this other here. And you can see I'm using it further down when I'm attaching the sword to the character. I'm using other, that's what I'm attaching it to. So if we wanted to change the player character's grip, we could do other and then colon and then set grip. And you can see it comes up with a little bit of prompt here to tell us that this might be what we're trying to do, is set the current grip animation used by this player. And that's perfectly exactly what we want to do. So let's hit enter or click that. And then if we look here, it's actually asking us to supply some kind of grip asset. Now, that's not necessary to make that from scratch on your own in code. An easy way to do that is just to add it as a property and then be able to set it through the entity editor over here. So to add it as a property, we go up to here into in between this parenthesis and this parenthesis, and we add a new property. Name is going to be the grip type, and the type is going to be a grip asset. And I've done that. And even though I saved it, it hasn't appeared down here because I've half finished this thing down here. So I'm just going to finish this line of code that I half started, self.properties.gripType. So that's referencing that new property we set up there. I've saved it. And if you look now in the entity editor for this sword in the pickup script, we can see that there's this new grip type, which is this property here. And we can change that using the drop-down menu. And we might want to change it to, if it's a sword, we probably want to change it to something like knife. If it was a gun, we might have to be a little bit more specific because of the different ways that you can hold the different guns, pistol, RPG, rifle, all of that sort of stuff. So I'm going to change it to knife. And now if I test that, I'm going to hit F5 to test it. And I run up to that sword and interact with it. We can see that now, rather than it just being attached to my hand, it looks like my character's holding it. And this is true for this walking animation, but also sprinting, rolling, jumping. It just makes sure that they don't hit themselves in the head by accident with the sword that they're holding in their hand. And so there you go. That's the basis behind the grip types. Now let's look at actions, which actually builds on top of that. So if I close that and go back into here. So we can, if we want to, we can animate our character so that they look like they're slashing that sword. So the way to do that is essentially to go to the player template and attach a script to that player. Now I've already attached one called action script, and so I'm going to edit that. And in here, you're going to want to create a function which is listening out for that button press. So if you write the name of your script, colon, and then on button pressed on any script that's attached to either the user or the player, that gets called automatically by Crayta when the player controlling that character presses the button, any button, doesn't matter. If they press the primary button, that's what this is looking out for, this if statement here. So the button name that they pressed is being passed in between these brackets, and that's a string, so a collection of alphabetical characters, and it can be numerical as well. And then we're checking, we're saying, is this button name that's been passed here equal to primary in quote marks? So primary is the name of the primary button. So if you're holding a gun and you're used to playing games in Crayta, then you know that left mouse click, for example, would be the primary button and it would fire the gun. So as we're holding a sword, I want this primary button to swoosh the sword in a swooshing kind of, what's that called? Some kind of swooshing motion. Anyway, okay, so let's make the character do that. So I can get hold of the player by doing self get entity. Remember that this script is attached to the player, so we can do self get entity to get hold of the player. And then colon play action. And if I do that and don't quite complete it, we can see there's two options here now. We've got this first one, which is play an animation action with default properties, and you just supply the name of the animation you want. And then this second one, which is play the animation and then have some special properties that you can decide. So you can tell Crayta how fast or slow you want to play the animation, whether you want it to be complete within a certain time limit, and whether you want to respond to any events that could happen during that animation. And that's what that table of properties is for. So let's start with the simple one. With this first one here, we just want to supply an action name. So I'm going to hit enter. Now, what possible action name might I have for my sword? Well, if you're not entirely sure, there's a really easy way to find out. If you go to developer.crayta.com and you go to the tutorials tab, scroll down in here, and there's this player animation grips actions and events tutorial. If we click on that, this lists everything that we need to know about the grips and actions and the events corresponding to those. And it essentially goes over what this tutorial is going over as well. So it's a really good resource to have. So if we scroll down in here, find the grip name that we're using at the moment, which is this knife one, and we can see the actions that we can possibly support with a knife grip. And there is only one, and it's melee. Notice for some of the other grips, there's more than one action. So for pistol, you've got fire, reload, and melee. And for shotgun, fire and reload, and so on and so on. So for our knife grip, we've got melee. So I'm going to use that as my action. So it's quote mark, capital M, melee. End quotes, end brackets. So now when I press this button, when I press the primary button, it will play the action melee. Now, if I've got a grip at the moment that doesn't support the melee action, it won't do anything. Let's take a look. So I have tested the game and I'm now hammering the primary button, and notice nothing is happening. If I press console, it tells me there is no melee action for this type of grip. It's only a warning. It's not an error. It's not causing problems. But if you don't want that to happen, then you might want to check what grip stance you're in at the moment or something like that. So now if I pick up the sword, holding it in the correct grip, and I have my swooshing motion, slashing motion. That's a much better term for what I thought was a swooshing motion. Okay, and that's essentially like, yeah, grips and actions. But we can do a little bit more than that. So let's go just a little bit further. Because I've written this as a script, this handy script, I could do something like grab this pistol and add the script to the pistol. So add the pickup script and then change so for the pistol, the grip type would need to be pistol. And let's change the action type to fire, which is the primary firing action for the pistol. And let's just check that that works. And you'll see that if I interact with this, didn't hook up the interact event. Let's make sure you hook up the interact event as well. On interact, grab the pistol, drag it in there, and then select the on pickup event. So let's go and get that pistol. Okay, I have the pistol and now primary fire, and I'm shooting the pistol. So there you go. So you can see that you've got different grips and different animations that go with those grips. Let's go back to the sword now, and let's start to look at some of the additional properties we can possibly add to that action. So I've got this melee action, and I want to make it slower or faster. There's an easy way to do that. Firstly, need to create a table to store the animation data. I'm going to call it anim data, and it's an empty table to start with, like that. And then I'm going to use anim data, and I'm going to do dot playback speed, and then I can set how fast I want this this animation to play. So if I wanted it to be normal speed, I would put in 1. If I wanted it to be half speed, I'd put in 0.5. Or if I wanted it to be twice as fast as it is normally, I could put in 2. So let's make the playback speed 2, and let's see what happens when I pick up the sword. So I pick up the sword, and now, didn't quite finish there. So I've got my playback speed to 2, and I also need to pass it in within this play action function here. So that's a comma there. So firstly, the action name, and then the properties. So anim data is the properties. Okay, that looks a lot more like it's going to do something. Okay, pick up the sword and swoosh. Really quick swoosh. By changing the playback speed of different entities within your game world, you can make things appear lighter, heavier, that sort of thing. You can really tweak the game to make it feel like you want it to. So we've got a quick sword here. That could be, a small knife might be that sort of speed, and then a bigger sword could be a bit slower. So that's definitely something you can play around with. Let's just reset that to normal speed. Another thing you can do is you can use the event system that's built into the actions. So when the action occurs, when the animation is going on, let's go and have a look at the animation doing that. There is specific moments in some of the animations where you can hook into the event within the animation. So here you can see that I'm slashing this sword. When it would hit something, like when it would hit that wall, I can hook into that event and do something with that data. So I can play a sound, or I could play an effect, or I could play a sound and an effect, or I could even do some other more intricate coding that, I don't know, opens doors or changes the level or whatever you want to do, really. And the way we do that is still with this anim data table, and we're going to do anim data dot events equals open parentheses, and I'm going to give myself some space, close parentheses. And then if you're not sure what events you might possibly be able to use, again, going back to the resource here, and you can see the event here. There's a standard event, melee impact. And if you're not sure about how to use it, there's even this helpful sort of template down the bottom here, dot events equals, and it shows you how to do that. So we need this melee impact event. So going back into here, it's melee impact equals function. And then maybe we want to play a sound. So let's just add a sound property. Impact sound. Type equals sound asset. I'm going to go to my player now, which is where this action script is located. And I'm going to go and choose a sound. If I put in impact into the filter here, we can hear lots of different impact sounds. I mean, there's lots of different impact sounds. I'm going to just use the basic punch impact. It's not, it's a sword. It's not going to punch, but it kind of gives the right essence of what that would sound like. So melee impact equals function, and we're going to play a sound. Self, get entity, play sound, self.properties.impact sound. Okay. So going to grab the sword. There you go. So that event is really, really useful for things like when you're reloading the shotgun, you might want to play the shotgun reloading sound. When you've got other impact, like maybe you've got a pickaxe and you want it to impact stone and things like that, you can play those sorts of sounds. So you can hook into the events as well. Or maybe even deal damage to people exactly when you hit them. Yeah, so there's the basis behind grips, and then using some of those grips to provide us with animations that we can run on our player characters. And then those animations provide us with events that we can hook into and perform other things like playing sounds. Hopefully this has been a helpful tutorial. It's been really enjoyable to get involved with grips and stuff like that. And I'm looking forward to seeing how you use all of this in Crayta.